Welcome to the Winning at Life podcast. I'm your host, Gregory Ricks. Thanks for joining us today. Each week, I'm talking about a number of topics, pretty much always dealing with money. I'm the financial guy. It's a financial show. And a little bit of background, I've been in the industry for decades. Well, I'll age myself, but ever since college, I've been in the financial services business. And for newbies to the show, my love is compounding interest. I love the doubling of money, just like it just blows my mind still how you can grow wealth by starting a little bit and then that money starts working for you. And that's all topics lead to having financial success. And we, if anything, we always try to nudge people to get started saving money. Even if you've got too much debt, start saving money. Oh, I don't make enough money. Well, save money anyhow. Get it to compounding. I don't have emergency money. Well, start saving money and get some of it to compounding. Whatever excuse you're having, I'm going to say, but save some money anyhow. Find a way to save. Pick up an extra job. This gig economy gives you those opportunities. Now, one of the topics I want to talk about today is the ideal retirement and facing the reality. What gets in the way of your best retirement? Something been going in my mind. I always think you probably should be using a financial advisor. And, you've probably heard of this concept, having a life coach. Well, how about having a financial coach, somebody that you bounce ideas over? I'm an advocate because I am CEO, founder of Gregory Ricks Total Wealth. We run a financial advisory firm, and we've got a staff of more than 20 people. We've got 6 licensed people on staff, looking to add more. And we take care of, I'll just say, 1,000 plus households. But we get calls every day of people asking for help, asking for guidance. And that's what we're in the business of doing. But unless you've got tremendous education, tremendous life experience, I think this is probably going to be a challenge for you. And that's one reason to use somebody that understands growing money and the ins and outs. And I go back to my mom's story of where she came into that money after dad was killed, settled up with the oil companies, came into a whole bunch of money, and 10 years later, that money was gone. And to me, it is just incomprehensible. Like, how does that happen when it is enough money? But what happens for people to go through that money is they're spending more than it's capable of generating. What it means is they're eating into the principal. And that's one reason, if you're looking for retirement, one of the most important things is the planning. But you got to understand the capability of these assets and how long you're needing this money to last. And then what are the surprises that you're going to be faced with needing more money, or you've spent down your emergency money here. Retirement is more than just having money. It's about goals, dreams, and having financial security for what is next. And we just don't know everything that we're facing. But one of the rules is kind of think about what you should think about is generating a 4% income stream off of assets. Just kind of say that's your rule of thumb, having a 4% income stream. So if you've got $1 million, what's it capable of generating? About 40,000 a year. If you're taking more than 4%, you're putting that principal at risk. If you're taking less than 4%, that money is going to outlast you, is what the probability is. So you're needing to make adjustments. And then you also got to look at how are those assets managed. And if you have all of it in risk assets and you're taking money from it, you're risking negative sequence of returns. And that's something we'll talk with you about here in a minute. But here's the question. Am I going to be okay? That is the most common and valid retirement question. In surveys we've done over the years, what do people ask most of the time? They're asking, will my money last? That is the number one question on all the public events I've done over the years, and we always give surveys. That's the number one question that comes back, is people have questions about that. They have worries about that. And another thing I have here in my notes is, I'm not sure what to ask. Well, ask something. You should be asking questions. And there are no silly questions. You're not expected to be the expert. And hey, from our end, we may not know the answers, but we all do also have tremendous resources. We will get the answers. We're not going to give you the answer for the sake of giving you an answer or give you something that we're unsure about or wrong. And that's something, if you stump us, that's okay. But we have resources to go back and work on this. And sometimes this is something, there's a phrase I learned from a coach a couple years ago, and it's thinking time. And sometimes you might pose a situation, you might pose a question, and I like to refer to this. And my wife is Chief Financial Officer of Gregory Ricks Total Wealth. And sometimes I'll just tell her, I said, I'm just going to have to put some thinking time into that. So sometimes an idea comes up, a question comes up, and I'll put some thinking time into it before I have to make a decision or provide that answer. And that's, I want to think it through. And because we see so many clients and we see so many scenarios, a lot of times your scenarios, we've already been across it multiple times. We've already dealt with that question hundreds of times. But there could be a unique situation. And that's one reason we do multiple visits when working with a family. It's like you come in, say for a first visit. Well, that's a get to know you session. That's a fit visit. That's also a discovery visit, so we can get information and pull together data and work on the answers, work on a plan for you. And that's what we would talk about on the next visit. Why? We need to put some thinking time into it to give you those answers. So no question is a bad question. The only bad question is the one you should have asked, but you held back. There's another thing we do in meetings at Gregory Ricks Total Wealth is we do a door knock when there's sometimes 15 to 20 minutes left in the visit. Somebody will come in and check on the advisor, or see if you're needing something. And part of that is that lets the advisor know, hey, there's about 15 minutes left in the meeting. And that way we've already let the person sit in the meeting that that's going to happen. Because what happens at that point, they might be holding back and all of a sudden realize that there's not much time. We get more of our questions in the last 15 minutes of the meeting than the previous 45 minutes because we scheduled the meetings to run about an hour. We have a little bit of wiggle room if we need to run a few minutes longer, but that's where all of a sudden really important questions start coming out. And if you're a couple, if you're married, both of you should be there. And then we're also looking for questions from both individuals that are in the meeting. And sometimes we'll even address it. If somebody's being real quiet, we'll focus some questions to them as well. Because some people are embarrassed to ask questions or embarrassed to not understand what's going on. And you're not there to be the expert. We are the ones that are licensed and have time in the chair and have been doing this for a long time. Here's my next topic here. Key risks that threaten your retirement. Politics and legislation. You know, we always, Congress always has a plan for us, is how I like to say this, but elections, Congress, policymakers influence your retirement with shifting rules, taxes, and markets. You know, you may not know this, but Congress, all of congressmen, they have a book that's a compilation of all the tax strategies maybe they've thought about putting together. They keep that together because that's all of a sudden they're needing to raise some more money, tax something. They can always go to this binder of all these things they've talked about over the past several years, and they keep that up to date. If there's something they're needing to do or raise some money, and that means increase taxes, they've always got something to go to there. So they're not always looking on our best interest. I think the government runs in a deficit, doesn't it? Well, they're always looking to take it from us. So we always got to be aware of what potentially can happen in the future from legislation. Taxes. So we got to review how changes like tax cuts and Jobs Act impacts you, and what you owe. Importance of working with a financial advisor is having a discussion on taxes, accounting for taxes. How are you being taxed now? How are you going to be taxed down the road? How are you going to be taxed in retirement? And one of the things I always want to get money over to the tax-free area. I like money growing tax-free. I like to take distributions that are untaxed. How can we make taxes go away? Hey, life insurance can be a neat trick right there that maybe we should dive into one day and talk about how life insurance can make taxes go away. Because what is one of the neat things about life insurance? Tell me, if a life insurance pays a death benefit, here's the question, is the death benefit taxed? It is not under the tax code. So that also gives us some opportunities there. How can we use that as a financial tool that creates a better situation without creating taxes? Or how can it make taxes go away? And you always got to be planning for inflation. Things are going to cost more. We've felt that the past few years here. Inflation's been a problem. You know what? It's going to be a problem in the future, but we need it to not be a big problem, but just more of that subtle problem of things going up over time. But when we build retirement plans, we are accounting for future inflation. We may take it conservatively, and you probably should. Imagine having 5 or 6% compounding for decades in the future. There's just no way you could keep up with it at that rate. But, you know, we do factor in a couple percent ongoing in inflation, meaning you should have an expectation of having adjustments every few years that increases your income in the future. I don't usually factor in increasing income every year, but every few years to expect, we anticipate adjustment up in income. So you've got to think about inflation, pandemics, health risks was what we've experienced. You know, health is going to cost some money in the future, and you've got to have a plan for that. Even from a long-term care standpoint, I think that's a legitimate subject. I always kind of think on the back end of life, you've got to have the ability to, this may sound crude, but you've got to have the ability to burn through some money. Why? On the back end of life, let me get a sip of water here. That's better. You know, when you're a couple, you're helping each other. And the first to die has help. The second to die, there is less help or extended family then. And that's one reason I think it may cost more for the second to die from a health standpoint and health care standpoint, because they've got to hire more help from that. And I always kind of say, one of the things I like to look at when in building a retirement plan, how do things look 5, 10, 15 years into retirement? Now, there's kind of two phases of that, where if I'm working with somebody in their 40s, I'm looking at how does the next 5 to 10 years look according to the plan. That takes them to 50. If I look 15 years, it takes them to 55. But then also I'm going to jump over to, okay, they're anticipating retirement be at, say, age 65. Okay, I want to look how that's going 5, 10, 15 years into retirement. How's that taking them to 70, 75, and 80? And then I want to jump further out. How does that look 30 years into retirement? Are the assets stable, or is it spending down some? Is it moving up? And then I want to jump over, what does it look like at, say, age 105? And I know what you're thinking. Oh, I don't want to live that long. I'm not going to be around that long. You don't know. Our job is to look further out and see how things are looking and what situation's going to be in. So like if I'm there, I'm at the 90s, how much money's left? Do we have the ability that if we've got to spend more on health care or help, can we burn through some money without running out of money? Kind of see, those are kind of the things we look at when putting together a retirement plan. And then another risk to your retirement is cybersecurity, the rise of scams and how retirees sometimes become targets, staying protected as tech expands. And that's something we got to look out for you on also, is to make sure that you don't get taken advantage of, that you have a plan for that. And then I've kind of talked about this a little bit here, is longevity, the double-edged sword. People are living longer, and I expect you to live longer. Technology is advancing at such a rapid rate. And that means we got to plan for 20, 30 years or more into retirement. Kind of say life expectancy, I guess on average is late 70s. And we do know people that are dying younger than that, but we also know people are living a lot longer than that, but we just don't know where it's going to be. I don't know how long I'm going to live myself. I could live 5 more years, could live 30 more years. But I'd say, you know, when I'm probably going to pass, sometime between now and age 100, somewhere in there. I don't know. Or if I had to predict for you, we kind of do assessment. IRS has tables on that, and that's one reason we subtly will ask about your health. We'll subtly ask, we're going to ask, what's your date of birth? Why? I need your age. I need to assess how your health is, how your weight is, any medical history, with some subtle questions, and then project what might life expectancy be. How long am I planning for income to last? Most cases, what we're sitting down with folks and planning for 20, 30, 40 years, depending on when we start working with them. There are sometimes cases where it's a very short lifespan. I'll tell you, one of the more difficult discussions I had earlier in my career was sitting down with a gentleman that didn't have long to live. I think it was under 2 years and was the expectancy, and he lived about a year from the time we started working together. But what were we planning for? Not just for his year or two he had left from the disease that he had, but how was his spouse going to be taken care of, and how was his children going to be looked out for? Which, what did that entail? 30 years or so with the money that he was leaving behind, and he was leaving a considerable amount behind. So we were looking out for him on his year, but what he was wanting us really to do is look out for those in his family. So it was kind of like creating a retirement plan for his spouse, knowing that he was going to be gone. So it was kind of like, it was a difficult discussion to start with. So that's one reason we talk about longevity. And it is important to look into the future and make sure you have income and that it's not going to run out. And if it's going the wrong direction, it needs to be addressed. It needs to be discussed. And I think it should be discussed with extended family, especially when you get up in age. And if family's going to have to take over on direction of that, they should have talks with the advisor so that everybody's on the same page and we don't have abuse of the retirement money there. So retirement deals with so many things. Retirement early versus late is another topic, like where some people come in and they're like, when can I retire? When should I retire? Should I keep working? What's really fun is we have those discussions, and they say, well, I'm just looking for when I can retire. And they come back for the meeting and start going over the data and information and the plan, and we go over the information. And I said, the only reason you're working now is because you want to work. And it's usually a stunned look. The rough ones are when we have to have that discussion is like, you're going to need to go 2 more years. That's always kind of the tough ones from that standpoint, where they're wanting to retire now and they are having to work longer. And then the joy when they're kind of surprised, like, what? I can retire now? And some of the things that affects that is your health insurance. That's one of the bigger factors that causes people to work to 65, where they might want to prior to then retire, but the cost of health care, you have to factor that in and explore what that's going to be. It's surprising costs even at 65. A couple could need $300,000 for health care, not including long-term care. And that's going to be a whole nother subject we talk about coming up on the podcast here in the near future is about long-term care and how do you account for those increasing health care costs in retirement. And then you've got the myth that Medicare covers everything. And we'll probably get into a deep dive on that as well when we cover that. So You've got to account for health care, the costs of that. Long-term care is going to be a challenge. We have some neat strategies, though, to help with that on retirement planning. And then spousal planning. What is going to happen to the spouse? How is that income going to look? What income is going to be lost when somebody dies? There's always, if both of you are receiving Social Security in retirement, which most couples are, but guess what? The smaller check's going to go away. So that's already accounting there. If you've got a pension, how was that pension set up? If you already set that up, is that continuing to the spouse, or is it reducing, or does it stop when you die? And that's one reason, if you've got this upcoming, that you need to have discussions with us about this, on turning on Social Security, and both of you turning it, each of you turning it on at the correct time, and which one is the leave behind benefit. The other, for those of you that, and for those of you that have pensions, you need to have a sounding board on turning that on. I remember one of the discussions with the couple, and the wife was just shocked. And he had set up the pension, and the pension was going to end when he died. He did not, he maximized the pension and didn't leave spousal continuation. And I remember the way she turned around her head and looked at him, and her question as she did that, it was like, I thought she was going to have whiplash, how fast she snapped around there. And his question she had for him. And I agreed to that. And of course, he said, yes, we discussed it. Well, not in a way that she understood that. And that needs to be a household discussion, account for that money, because if you've got that money that you're both living off of and it goes away when you die, what's happening in that household out there? So spousal planning is really important. And the best thing you can do is start a conversation today. Look at your situation, ask questions, and begin preparing. Early action gives you more options, and what it really gives you is peace of mind. So reach out to us with your questions. Email info@GregoryRicks. Go to the website. Well, did I give it out? info@GregoryRicks.com is the email address. Check out our website, GregoryRicks.com. And if you've got questions, reach out to the office. It's 504-832-9200, and we'll address some of your questions on the future podcasts. But we're here for you. If there's anything you need, reach out to us. Thanks for joining the podcast today, and I'll see you next week on the Winning at Life with Gregory Ricks podcast.